Please. Before we start with the daily routine today, there has been a draw for tonight's late debate, and the topic is, therefore be it resolved that in the wake of the collapse of the 2014 Commonwealth Games bid, government bring forward its plan for major infrastructure funding for recreation and sport in Nova Scotia. And it was submitted by the Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party. We'll commence now with the daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, if I might, permit me to give an introduction.
Please do.
Resolution. Excuse me. Yes, yeah. Mr. Speaker, in your gallery, Mr. Speaker, we have some fans who have travelled great distances to be here in our beautiful province and here in the city with us for the International Ice Hockey Federation Championships. And Mr. Speaker, we have individuals from Finland and Germany, I believe, in the gallery with us here today. And the attendance of so many fans has really electrified the city and the capital. And the reason why it has is because of the fans who have come from great distances, Mr. Speaker. And I ask our fans to stand in their place and be recognized by the House, and to thank them for coming to Nova Scotia. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the International Ice Hockey Federation is for the first time in its 100-year anniversary or history holding the games outside of Europe, and whereas the teams and their loyal fans from around the world have come to both Nova Scotia and Quebec to be a part of the Centennial Championship and to also enjoy the beautiful host cities, and whereas the arrival of the fans for all teams has not only been a boost to tourism, it has also added a great deal of enthusiasm on the streets of Halifax and in the Metro Centre. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House applaud each team, their coaches and managers, the volunteers for the IIHF 2008 Championships, and all the fans who have supported this incredible hockey event. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Prime Minister yesterday announced the Canada First Defence Strategy, a plan to support the Canadian Forces with the people, equipment and support they need to meet the nation's long-term domestic and international security challenges. And whereas the announcement complements steps already taken to strengthen the Canadian Forces, including the procurement of new and upgraded equipment, such as new strategic and tactical lift aircraft, joint support ships, armoured vehicles, helicopters, and Arctic offshore patrol ships. Whereas our province is a significant contributor to our forces, a significant investment in our military is a benefit to the brave men and women of Nova Scotia who put themselves in harm's way here and around the world defending our democratic freedom. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House commend the Prime Minister on the significant investment and commitment to our Canadian forces. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
You can come along too if you want. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas National Nursing Week is an opportunity to celebrate nurses whose skill and dedication contribute to the better health of Nova Scotians every day. And whereas nurses have broadened their professional scope from their pioneering work in patient care in hospitals to providing public health care in schools, leading research and international development initiatives, helping to find solutions to improve access to health care, and increasingly supporting health promotion and illness prevention. And whereas the Canadian Nurses Association this week raising awareness of this expanded role nurses play in healthcare today, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House join me this week in saluting the accomplishments of more than 12,000 nurses in this province and acknowledging their vital role in healthcare. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas George Savory, Executive Director of Family and Community Supports with the Department of Community Services, was recognized by the Nova Scotia Council for the Family with the Achievement of Excellence Award. And whereas this award was presented in recognition for the outstanding contribution George Savory has made to improving the lives of vulnerable children, youth, and family in the province of Nova Scotia for many years. And whereas George Savory consistently epitomizes all that is the very best in a social worker, manager, and leader. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize the contribution of George Savory, registered social worker, on behalf of children, youth, and families in our province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection on an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I have a resolution, but before I read my resolution, I'd like to make an introduction. Today, visiting in your gallery, Mr. Speaker, is Mickey McDonald. Along with Mickey is Farida Gabani, one of the hardest working staff people at Health Promotion and Protection. And Mickey has been a lifelong volunteer in our community, and I'd like the members of the House to give... Oh, there is another person up there, too. The member for Bedford is up there as well, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask him to stand and receive the warm welcome of the House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Halifax businessman Mickey McDonald has long been an active and involved volunteer in our province, and whereas we are pleased that Mickey's numerous volunteer activities include his role as chair of the Nova Scotia Boxing Authority, and whereas Mickey recently opened Palooka's Gym on Gottingen Street to help give back to the community by engaging involvement in healthy and active lifestyles, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Mickey McDonald on his dedication and commitment to the sport of boxing and providing guidance and leadership to our young people. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Computers for Schools has been an effective partnership of provincial and federal governments, school boards, and the private sector since 1994, and whereas this program is a critical part of a sustainability strategy that provides quality computers to schools and valuable technical work experience for recent graduates of technical college programs, and whereas Computers for Schools is a significant reuse component of this government's e-waste strategy and plays an important role in our strategy to refresh technology in schools, libraries, literacy organizations, and other nonprofit groups. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House congratulate Computers for Schools Nova Scotia, as well as our partners Nova Knowledge, Industry Canada, the Alliant Telephone Pioneers, and others on reaching the milestone of 45,000 refurbished computers. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act.
The Honourable Member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act.
Bill 169, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Environment Act.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Bill 170, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Require the Governor in Council to Make Regulations Respecting the Registration and Use of Low-Speed Motor Vehicles.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Require the Government in Council to Make Regulations Respecting the Registration and Use of Low-Speed Motor Vehicles.
Bill 171, entitled An Act to Require the Government Council to Make Regulations Respecting the Registration and Use of Low-Speed Motor Vehicles.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Team Nova Scotia is composed of 12 youth who will be competing in the 2008 Canadian Chess Challenge in Edmonton, May 17th to 19th. And whereas these 12 youth each won the provincial title in their respective grade level, and whereas Andrew Kifty, a grade 3 student at Hawthorne Elementary School in Dartmouth, won the provincial grade 3 championship. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Andrew Kifty of Dartmouth for winning his provincial grade championship and wish him and his teammates all the best at the 2008 Canadian Chess Challenge, May 17th to 19th in Edmonton, Alberta. Mr. Speaker, request a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Liberal Caucus has long advocated on behalf of low-income Nova Scotians, and whereas a Liberal bill calling for the establishment of a poverty reduction strategy working group was passed by the House of Assembly in 2007, and whereas this working group will complete its consultation and make recommendations to government by June 30th of this year, therefore be it resolved, the Premier proclaims Saturday, June 28th, Poverty Reduction Day, and in doing so encourage communities and organizations to participate in events aimed at reducing the hardships that far too many Nova Scotians face on a daily basis. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Reg Wire was recently honoured as Fireman of the Year for his outstanding enthusiasm and dedicated work as a volunteer firefighter with the Bedeck Fire Department, and whereas Bedeck Fire Chief Ernest Roberts praised Reg for his considerable contributions, but also told Reg he relied upon him because of his 30 years of experience as a firefighter, and whereas, besides honouring Reg Wire for his outstanding service, Chief Roberts also thanked the Bedeck Fire Department Ladies Auxiliary for their kind contribution of $5,000 to assist the department with their respective needs. Therefore, be it resolved that all MLAs in this legislature recognize the 3 decades of superb firefighting and volunteer efforts of Reg Wire with the Bedeck Volunteer Fire Department, as well as the hard work put forth by the Bedeck Fire Department Ladies Auxiliary on an annual basis. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Envirothon is a hands-on environmental competition where high school students have an opportunity to learn about the environment, ecological and community matters. And whereas 4 grade 12 students, Eric Mason, Ben Sear, Emma Hoffman, and Laura Brothers from Northumberland Regional High School in Pictou County won 2nd place at this year's Envirothon competition held at Acadia University. And whereas as part of the competition, this team of students used their skills to compete in identifying various species, performing hands-on tests and field experiments focusing on forestry, wildlife, and aquatic ecology. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Northumberland Regional High School grade 12 students Eric Mason, Ben Sear, Emma Hoffman, and Laura Brothers for competing at the 2008 Envirothon competition and for winning 2nd place at this prestigious event. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canada-wide Science Fair involves 450 students from across the country who gather to present their findings to the public and to be judged on their presentation merits, and whereas 4 Cape Breton High School students will be attending this year's national competition, and whereas Todd Mercer, Mike McIsaac, Alyssa Moss of Riverview Rural High, and Jonathan McNeil of Sydney Academy will be part of the group of students representing our province at this exciting event. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate Todd Mercer, Mike McIsaac, Alyssa Moss, and Jonathan McNeil on being selected to represent Nova Scotia at the Canada-wide Science Fair and wish them luck in their presentations and judging. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Union Corner, Hants County native Corrine Millard is the first Nova Scotia graduate to ever receive a Master of Science in Applied Geomatics, and whereas the new joint degree is offered by the Nova Scotia Community College Centre of Geographic Sciences and Acadia University, and whereas Ms. Millard is now using her education as an aquaculture GIS officer with the Nova Scotia Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Therefore, be it resolved that all MLAs in this legislature congratulate Corrine Millard for receiving her Master of Science in Applied Geomatics while wishing her every success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the first International Ice Hockey Federation Old Timers Tournament organized by Hockey Canada took place in cooperation with the IIHF at the St. Margaret Centre in Upper Tantallon, whereas 47 teams in 5 divisions from Russia, Germany, Finland, the United Arab Emirates, and of course host Canada participated in this historical event, whereas Mike LaRue, manager of the St. Margaret Centre, all local volunteers, and the St. Margaret Centre staff did an exceptional job hosting this event in true Canadian hockey fashion for the love of our game. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate all the volunteers, teams, and participants, and extend our thanks to all involved with the first ever International Ice Hockey Federation Old Timers Tournament at the St. Margaret Centre in Upper Tantallon. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ainsley McFadgen, a 21-year-old native of Glace Bay, is a member of the women's swimming and diving team for Brown's University of Providence, Rhode Island. Whereas recently the Brown Bears women's swimming and diving team finished their 2008 season with a 6th place finish in competitions held at Princeton University, whereas Ainsley is currently in her 3rd year of a science degree with a major in biology and plans on attending medical school upon graduation. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Ainsley McFadgen on her many achievements and wish her every success in what appears to be a promising future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Truckers Association of Nova Scotia held their annual meeting in Truro in mid-April, and whereas during this annual meeting, Duncan Gillis of Quebec was presented with an award for his enduring support of the trucking industry, and whereas on the plaque presented to Duncan, the Truckers Association had the following inscribed: in recognition of his positive attitude and continuous commitment to the betterment of the trucking industry and his long-term affiliation with the Trucking Association, thank you for your continued support. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Duncan Gillis of Quebec for being recognized in such a positive fashion by the Truckers Association of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas friends in the community gather to honour Roby Atkinson for his many dedicated years of community service at the Upper Port Latour United Baptist Church on May 17, 2008. And whereas Roby Atkinson is a fine sample of determination and faith, having served as a school teacher, principal, school board member, and minister of the Upper Port Latour United Baptist Church for many years. And whereas Roby Atkinson has worked diligently to provide outstanding service to the youth and the residents of Shelburne County through his leadership, devotion, and faith. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize Roby Atkinson on being honored by his peers and the community in thanking for his many years of inspiring and faithful service to the people of Shelburne County and to the Upper Port Latour United Baptist Church. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and notice without passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Digby-Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the clam diggers of Digby, Annapolis, and Kings County have joined forces to establish Clam Harvesting Area 2 Clammers Association, and whereas their goal is to revitalize the clamming industry and to create a sustainable future for all clam harvesters throughout these counties, and whereas these new associations have pledged to work with federal, provincial departments and agencies, as well as municipal councils, buyers, First Nations, and others to renew the clam harvesting industry. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Department of Fisheries pledge to work with this newly formed association to create a sustainable clamming industry in Digby, Annapolis, and Kings County. I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Agreed. There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I heard a no. With the permission of the host, we'll just wait. We'll move on and come back. Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome students from Horton High who are in the class along with their teacher, Brad Richard. Half of them are here right now and the other half will be appearing a bit later. Horton High, actually most of the students from Horton High are my colleague David Morse's riding, but my students from Port Williams go to Horton High, and so they're down here to visit with the department and also to see the House in action. And I'd ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
The Honourable the Member from Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 24 years ago, Ken Lake of Avondale started an annual 45 card tournament that has grown in immense popularity. And whereas local community halls in Avondale, Belmont, Poplar Grove, and Stanley all hold monthly 45 card games, which are commonly referred to as the 45 Circuit. And whereas approximately 50 players participate in a monthly afternoon 45 games and have a barrel of fun playing, with Jean Demott and Helen Duncanson being a recent winning team at a 45 card tournament in Avondale. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this Legislative Assembly applaud the initiative shown by Ken Lake in 1984 for beginning the popular 45-card circuit while implementing each and every player today for their competitive card spirit and for simply wanting to have an afternoon of fun and goodwill. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nigel Bennett is an accomplished and world-renowned theatre and film actor and co-chair of Motion Picture Industry Charitable Alliance, and whereas Nigel Bennett starred in the well-known Forever Night series, for which he won a Gemini, and was nominated for a 4th time as Best Actor for his role in the television series At the Hotel. And whereas Nigel Bennett is a resident of Lynacy in Pictou East and was the guest speaker at the 2008 Pictou County Tourist Association Awards Banquet, where he eloquently spoke on why he chose Pictou County as a place to live, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the world-renowned actor-performer Nigel Bennett on his Gemini achievements and commend him on choosing Pictou County as his home and for his long-time commitment to the Motion Picture Industry Charitable Alliance. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Digby-Annapolis.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'll just read the therefore of the
Please do.
Of the last resolution. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Department of Fisheries pledge to work with the newly formed association to create a sustainable clamming industry in Digby, Annapolis, and Kings County. I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Barrett Enterprises Limited of Beaver Bank has provided a green solution to waste wood disposal while clearing land. And whereas in the harvesting of the wood fiber from the Fall River Recreation Centre, they were able to retrieve 240 tons of green fuel wood chips. And whereas this collection of wood chips replaces 60,000 litres of oil and reduces CO2 emissions by 192 tons, therefore be it resolved that members of this House recognize the step Barrett Enterprises Limited has taken to improve our environment. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Immigration on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me the time. Mr. Speaker, it's always wonderful to see our colleagues from up the hill, I guess we can say, from the Halifax Regional Municipal Council here in the House with us today. And I'd just like to take a moment to introduce a colleague, a friend, a seatmate for more than 6 years around the table, and a good friend of this House, Councillor Reg Rankin from District 22 from the Halifax Regional Municipality. If you'd like to stand up and receive a warm welcome from the House.
The Honourable the member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the eyes of the country were on New Glasgow earlier this year when CBC television broadcast from the Westside Community Centre on one of the country's favourite days, Hockey Day in Canada. And whereas the New Glasgow satellite location was the one only in Atlantic Canada, acknowledging the town's hockey history and connections, including a homecoming meet and greet with New York Islander John Sim. And whereas 11 local schools took part in hockey activities for the week leading up to the 13-hour broadcast, while many local businesses got into the spirit with decorated shop fronts and hockey jerseys were worn by people all over the town. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send congratulations to the town of New Glasgow for a most successful Hockey Day in Canada, making Nova Scotia and the region proud with its spirit and hockey legacies. Mr. Speaker, request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas each year families in the Cole Harbour area look forward to the annual musical production at Astral Drive Elementary School, and whereas after 3 months of dedication and commitment to hard work, rehearsals, meeting deadlines, designing sets and costumes, this year's musical production entitled Twinderella will be performed at the Astral Drive Elementary School on Wednesday, May 14, 2008. And whereas teachers Louise Bergeron, Jennifer Leduc, Stephanie Wolfe, Julienne Gallant, Debbie Swan, parents Kim Renault and Gina Morrison, and the entire grade 5 and 6 students at Astral Drive Elementary School sacrificed many lunch hours and extracurricular activities to successfully produce the musical Twinderella. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate teachers, parents, and the grade 5 and 6 students at Astral Drive Elementary School in Cole Harbour on their production of the musical Twinderella, and to commend them for their efforts, wishing them all the best during the upcoming performances. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Rick Plato, head coach of the Mount St. Vincent Mystics men's basketball team, was recently named the 2008 Coach of the Year by the Canadian Colleges Athletic Association, CCAA. And whereas Rick has been awarded the prestigious ACAA Coach of the Year award 9 times in his 19 years as head coach of the Mystics. And whereas Rick successfully led the Mystics to a perfect 23-0 season for the 2nd year in a row and topped off the year by winning the silver at the CCAA Basketball Nationals in Montreal. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate Rick Plato for his amazing accomplishments and encourage him to continue his outstanding coaching career for years to come. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Minister for Human Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the town of Bridgewater and the Royal Canadian Legion, branches of Zone 13, will hold their first ever Support Our Troops Red Rally. And whereas a Red Rally is an event dedicated to showing our support for our Canadian military men and women. And whereas the town of Bridgewater is requesting that everyone wear red on Fridays leading up to and including the Red Rally Day of May 23rd to show their support for our Canadian troops. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House show their support and be part of the Support Our Troops Red Rally to be held on May 23rd at 2 p.m. in Bridgewater. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mark Brennan likes to paint in remote places and has taken his canvas and watercolours from Cape Breton Highlands National Park to Algonquin Park in Ontario and Banff National Park in Alberta, and whereas Mark Brennan's paintings can be found in galleries throughout Nova Scotia and Ontario, including the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, Art Sales and Rental in Halifax, Lightsome Gallery in Antigonish, and Claris Gallery in Toronto. And whereas Mark Brennan, a self-taught landscape artist from Whitehill, Pictou County, recently had his painting Storm over Cape Smoky purchased for inclusion in the Nova Scotia Art Bank collection. Therefore, be resolved, this House of Assembly congratulate Mark Brennan for having his painting Storm over Cape Smoky included in the Nova Scotia Art Bank collection, and wish him continued success as one of our country's premier landscape artists. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia is a museum and library complex dedicated to preservation and protection of the Black culture and heritage in Nova Scotia. And whereas it was a brainchild of the late Reverend Dr. William Purley Oliver, CM, who was a strong advocate for human rights, equality, and education for all people, and the legacy lives on today in the work that Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia promotes. And whereas this year, the Centre celebrates its 25th years since its inception in 1983, and is now under the direction of Dr. Leslie Oliver, son of the late Reverend Dr. Oliver. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House join with me in congratulating the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia, staff and Board of Directors for continuing to promote and preserve Black culture and heritage throughout Nova Scotia and the world. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. Honourable the Minister of Health.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. En date ultérieure, je demande l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que M. Bernadette Comeau est un entrepreneur qui a connu du succès pendant plus de 60 ans et a créé Comeau Seafoods Limited, qui est maintenant l'un des plus importants employeurs du sud-ouest de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Attendu que le leadership de M. Comeau a contribué à l'établissement et à l'amélioration de la communauté dans laquelle il habite, non seulement du point de vue économique, mais aussi par l'appui des projets culturels de la région et de toute la province, notamment le Festival Acadien de Clare et le Jeu de l'Acadie, ce qui lui a valu d'être admis à l'Ordre du Canada en 1987. Et attendu que M. Comeau est l'un des 4 néo-écossais qui ont récemment été admis au Junior Achievement Business Hall of Fame pour ses accomplissements et l'inspiration qu'il offre aux jeunes de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Par conséquent, qu'il soit résolu que tous ces membres de cette Assemblée reconnaissent M. Bernadette Comeau pour ses accomplissements remarquables comme chef d'entreprise de notre province et le félicitent pour son plus récent honneur. Monsieur le Président, je demanderai l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day to move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mr. Bernadette Comeau has been a successful entrepreneur for over 60 years, creating Comeau Seafoods Limited, which is now one of the largest employers in Nova Scotia's French shore. And whereas Mr. Comeau's leadership has helped both shape and improve the community in which he lives, not only economically, but also supporting cultural endeavors in the region and across the province, like the Festival Acadien de Clare and the Jeu de l'Acadie, for example, earning him distinctions such as the Order of Canada in 1987. And whereas Mr. Comeau was one of 4 Nova Scotians recently inducted in the Junior Achievement Business Hall of Fame for his accomplishments and inspiration he has provided to the young people of Nova Scotia. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize Mr. Bernadette Comeau for his remarkable achievements as a business leader in our province and congratulate him for this most recent honour. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. Honourable the Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas young people from across Canada meet each year in Ottawa for the Youth Forum Encounters, whereas Jeanette Boudreau of Timberley will represent Sir John A. Macdonald High School this year, and whereas this experience will assist Jeanette to further develop her sense of citizenship and community involvement. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Jeanette Boudreau with best wishes for success at the Youth Forum Encounters in Ottawa. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Member for Clare.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Pardon me. Whereas Le Béangeois, a dance troupe from Clare, recently participated in the British Association of Teachers of Dancing Festival of Dance, May 2nd to May 4th, 2008. And whereas Le Béangeois placed first in their category, which included other dancing groups from Atlantic Canada, and had the highest mark for step dancing, and whereas Le Béangeois placed first among the Nova Scotia dancing group that competed in the category of Nova Scotia traditional dancers, therefore be resolved that Le Béangeois be congratulated for winning the BATD Traditional Rose Bowl and for winning the Dance Nova Scotia Traditional Rose Bowl. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas David Bryan, a Bible Hill native, made his NHL debut on February 2nd, 2008 in his Florida Panthers 3-2 win over the Tampa Bay Lightning. Whereas David Bryan started with the Truro Junior A Bearcats and the Halifax Mooseheads before beginning his professional career. Whereas David Bryan, who was not drafted by the NHL, is an exceptional example of the rewards of hard work, tenacity, and a positive attitude. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate on David Bryan on playing in the NHL and wish him every success as he works to establish his NHL career. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. Honourable the member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the price of oil is an issue of concern in everyone's lives, from home heating to every fuel-consuming industry in North America. And whereas if the price of oil continues to rise, homeowners in all industries will become unable to purchase this product.
Order, please. It's hard to hear the member speak.
With the Digby Scallop fleet in the trucking industry of Nova Scotia. Whereas a similar situation took place 90 years ago in North America, where a very few large corporations drained all the money from people's pockets, creating one of the greatest depressions ever known. Therefore, be it resolved that the Premier remind our Prime Minister of the problem which plagued the late 1920s, so that he can remind future oil investors to think before investing into oil stocks, unless the plan is to repeat what happened 90 years ago. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable the Minister of Labour, Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Valley Community Learning Association was established in 1989 to help adults achieve their personal learning goals, and whereas last year the VCLA helped well over 200 learners by impacting their lives and futures by improving their literacy skills, and whereas on May 4th the VCLA held its annual fundraising event, the Literacy Mile in Kentville, to raise awareness of and support for the literacy needs of Annapolis Valley residents. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the efforts of the Valley Community Learning Association in its objective of assisting Valley residents attain personal literacy goals. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Canadian Police Week is dedicated to increasing awareness and recognition of policing services while reinforcing the ties between police and the community. Whereas Police Week is also an opportunity to honour police officers for the public safety and security they provide to their communities. Whereas May 11th to May 17th, 2008 is recognized as Canadian Police Week. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the efforts of the brave men and women serving as police in our communities and help to make their constituencies aware of the great work police officers are doing. Speaker asks for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable the Minister for Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mabel Margaret Murphy, a constituent of the Eastern Shore, celebrated, Mr. Speaker, her 100th birthday on April 29th. And whereas Mabel is a mother of 4, grandmother of 10, and a great-grandmother of 2. And whereas Mabel Murphy is an active member of her local community in everything from playing bingo to playing cards, and also active with her local church. Therefore, be it resolved that all members, Mr. Speaker, of this House congratulate Mabel Margaret Murphy on celebrating a significant milestone in her active life, her 100th birthday. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of following resolution. Whereas the Strait Area campus of the Nova Scotia Community College is celebrating the completion of the first year of the Straight to Work pilot program. Whereas the program is designed to provide intellectually or physically disabled students with the necessary life, social, and employability skills needed in preparation of entering the workforce. Whereas next month 11 students will graduate from the program with a certificate of accomplishment. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize the importance and the success of the Straight to Work program. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, can I request the consent of the House to revert the order of business to presenting and reading petitions.
Is it agreed? The Honourable, the member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a petition from Mount St. Vincent University. The operative clause reads, I am calling on your government to immediately stop discriminating against students and repeal Regulation 67 of the Employment Support and Income Assistance Act as part of the larger strategy to reduce poverty by reducing tuition fees, introducing needs-based grants, and raising social assistance rates. Mr. Speaker, it's signed by 206 students and staff of Mount St. Vincent University, and I have included my signature as well. Thank you very much.
The petition is tabled. We shall now go to orders of the day, oral questions put by members. Time is now 12:55, and we will go to 1:55. Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question will be for the Premier. There was no application for a power rate increase this year, but as the Premier would know, the world price of coal has been rising steeply in recent months. Nova Scotians are extremely dependent on coal for electricity. Unless there is a sudden reversal of the price trend, higher electricity rates are a definite possibility in the months ahead. So my question to the Premier is this: did you consider the impact on electricity rates of a steep increase in coal prices before you imposed your 8% across-the-board tax increase?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, what my colleague here in the House indicated yesterday, his intention to vote against more money going into the hands of low-income Nova Scotians while they try to keep their houses warm next year, Mr. Speaker. That is what that party have decided to go against, low-income Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. More help for seniors, Mr. Speaker. More help for students, Mr. Speaker. The 7th consecutive balanced budget in this province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Leader and that party, Mr. Speaker, are against Nova Scotians getting an HST rebate on their home heating next winter, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess the Premier didn't want to answer the question, but I'll ask him another one, see if he'll get to it this time. Beside coal prices, there are upward pressure on power rates in Nova Scotia. The introduction of wind power and additional emission controls on greenhouse gases and other air pollutants may well lead to increased power rates. Nova Scotians are willing to pay more for electricity if it means a cleaner environment, but they are far less willing to pay more because the Premier has abandoned one of his 7 key priorities. So my question to the Premier is this: did the Premier consider the impact of environmental protection measures on power rates before he decided to impose his 8% tax on electricity?
Honourable the Premier.
The only people, Mr. Speaker, that feel abandoned is the people of Nova Scotia by the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, who doesn't want them to have a raise in the basic personal exemption for personal income taxes to put more money in their pockets, who doesn't agree, Mr. Speaker, with students getting a doubling of the graduate tax credit, Mr. Speaker, who doesn't believe that the agricultural industry deserves more assistance, Mr. Speaker, in this province. Mr. Speaker, this government will continue to invest in the priority areas of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, in a balanced way, in a common sense way, and in a focused way, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The budget that increased taxes on household electricity by 8% also announced a comprehensive review of the province's tax structure. According to a report in Monday's Chronicle Herald, unlike the electricity tax hike, the tax review is supposed to be revenue neutral. The last so-called revenue-neutral tax to be introduced in this province was the HST. So, Mr. Speaker, my question is this: knowing that the price of power will continue to be an issue, did the Premier decide to get his tax hike in under the wire in case a fair review of Nova Scotia taxes would not recommend an 8% increase of the taxes on electricity?
The Honourable the Premier.
Same leader and the same party, Mr. Speaker, the NDP, who said we should have a rebate program. This government put a rebate program in, Mr. Speaker, something now they're against, Mr. Speaker. They're against balanced budgets. They're against the private sector. They want more taxes. They want more spending. Well, Mr. Speaker, this government is going to continue down a road of fiscal responsibility, and we're going to do it right.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. In recent days, the Minister of Finance and the Premier have been talking about reviewing the tax system in Nova Scotia with an eye towards competitiveness. We have the second highest gas tax in Canada, and far too often the price between here and neighbouring New Brunswick is 10 cents a litre. We already know that the gas tax is putting our business at a disadvantage. So my question to the Premier is, why are you waiting for a review to tell you what Nova Scotians already know, that our gas taxes are too high?
Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for raising his... yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the opposition finally got something right, Mr. Speaker. Do I thank the member of the Leader of the Liberal Party for his support? Yes, because he knows that you put people ahead of politics, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, that's the
Order,
best...
please.
Mr.
Order,
Speaker,
please. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, that's the best non-answer that I've gotten from this government in 4 years being in the House. The Minister of Finance has said that the tax review will be internal and that we will bring in consultants when necessary. Nova Scotians want a competitive tax system and they want to be able to prosper in their own province. However, unlike the current gas pricing system, Nova Scotians want to ensure that the review is independent and free of political interference. So, Premier, will you commit today to a fully independent tax review and to have those findings reported back to the House and not to your Cabinet?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly have confidence in the public servants of this province, Mr. Speaker, to do due diligence in this review and to get the expertise that's required externally in ensuring that whatever move forward that we make as a government, we do so with the very best information at our fingertips, Mr. Speaker. That is my commitment to the Leader. That is my commitment, Mr. Speaker, to the people of this province and the members of this House. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has spoken to this issue earlier in the week, Mr. Speaker, and one of the things that we want to make sure as a province in going forward and planning to grow our economy is to ensure that we are cost competitive with other provinces and across the country as a whole. And I'm very proud of the fact that, Mr. Speaker, at the present time, this province is cost competitive and a great place to do business.
The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You don't need to look far for taxation that is making our province uncompetitive. Many individuals are fueling up before they get into our province and fueling up when they leave. Nova Scotia companies are placed at a competitive disadvantage when our neighbours, because of our tax system that has driven the price of gas several cents higher per litre. So my question to the Premier is, if your review recommends lowering the motor fuel tax, will you commit to this House today to do that?
The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, in 2003, government in its wisdom, and I say in its wisdom, because of the sorry state of some of the roads in this province that were something that we did inherit from a previous government. Introduced
Order, please.
2-cent tax.
Order, please.
2 cents additional tax on gasoline to be dedicated entirely to the improvement of the roads. Mr. Speaker, with the exception of that 2 cents, if we were not paying that 2 cents to improve our roads, and I believe all Nova Scotians do support that, our gas would be 1 cent less than the average Canadian price.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question will be for the Premier. 4 years ago, diesel fuel and gasoline were the same price before taxes. Now, the pre-tax price of diesel fuel is 18 cents more than the price of gasoline. Business owners are finding it cheaper to buy a gasoline-powered fleet, although diesel fuel has better mileage with lower emissions and lower vehicle maintenance costs. Both diesel and gasoline prices are supposed to be based on the New York Harbor price, Mr. Speaker, but the regulations permit consideration of, quote, any additional factors the ministers considers to be relevant. So my question to the Premier is this: what are the additional factors that have led your government to approve much higher prices for diesel fuel?
Good. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, the price of diesel fuel, we do regulate that, and we follow the same principles that we do in setting the price of gasoline. And the reason that the price of diesel has gone so high, and the Honourable Member of the Opposition, Honourable Leader of the Opposition, did put a finger on it, because diesel engines were so much more efficient or gave better fuel economy. A lot of small businesses that used to burn gasoline converted to diesel. And what happened is this is a supply and demand. The supply for diesel is very, very high, and thus the price has risen on the world market.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a regulated market. Diesel and gasoline come from a single refinery. And I'm quite certain that the skyrocketing price of diesel has been the subject of discussion between government, the refinery, and wholesalers. The rapid rise in the price of diesel is on the mind of every restaurant or grocery store
Order,
that
please.
sees a...
The Honourable the Leader of the Official.
Mr. Speaker, I'm quite certain that skyrocketing price of diesel has been subject of discussion between government, the refinery, and wholesalers. The rapid rise in the price of diesel is on the mind of every restaurant or grocery store that sees a fuel surcharge on each delivery. Trucking, the fishery, and other diesel-dependent industries are in price shock. The Premier needs to show some leadership on this issue, so my question is
a question.
What options is his government exploring to restrain the unexpected and extreme increase in the price of diesel fuel?
Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to go back to the previous answer where the price of diesel is caused by a very high demand and a very limited supply. And Mr. Speaker, the other thing coupled with that was this year for diesel prices, we had right across, I guess, wherever they do it, an extremely cold winter. And as the Honourable Member would know, that basically the fuel which goes into automobiles and trucks for diesel is very similar to that which goes into oil tanks for heat. Because of the cold temperatures, there was an increased demand for furnace oil right across. It just put pressure on the supply, and the market responded accordingly.
Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government said that it would put all decisions through a green screen. The Premier says that he puts people first. When I wrote the government directly to first raise this issue, the letter wasn't even answered. I'll table the letter that I wrote in November of 2006. Now this government has allowed increases in the price of diesel that are twice as much as the increases in gasoline since January alone. This is not just a result of world prices, Mr. Speaker. So my question is this: when will Nova Scotians get more than excuses from this Premier, from this government, for the widening gap between the price of diesel fuel and the price of gasoline?
Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure whether the honourable member is saying that the government of Nova Scotia can control the world price of diesel. I think that's what he just said, but I can tell the honourable
Order,
member that we have
please.
the lowest in Atlantic Canada, Mr. Speaker, and like him and anybody else that uses diesel, including a vehicle that I have, I hope the price does go down.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on a new question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, my question will be for the Minister of Health. I'll table a letter written to the Minister by the chair of the board at Dykeland Lodge Nursing Home in Windsor. For over 2 years, this nursing home has had difficulty filling its beds when they become empty. Departmental policy is that beds should be filled within 5 days, yet the average vacancy for beds at Dykeland Lodge was over 14 days, and one bed was vacant for 45 days. So, Mr. Speaker, my question is this for the Minister: why has the department allowed beds to stay vacant at the Dykeland Lodge while seniors waited for placement?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very aware of the situation happening at Dykes Lodge. You know, there is a situation where the single entry access, there is some complications at times in placing people. For the most part, beds are pretty much taken on immediately. We're still unaware why this was happening. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to invest dollars into long-term care to make sure that beds are available at all times for our seniors to go through, unlike the opposition, who seem to be not wanting to support anything when it comes to the increase in long-term care, continuing care, as this government has done.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you,
on
Mr.
his first
Speaker.
supplementary.
The board is so frustrated, has decided to make this a public issue. The letter states, and I'll quote, "Nursing home beds are being left empty while community members are being sent home from hospital because acute care beds are filled by long-term care patients. There are also cases of individuals dying in transitional units of hospitals while waiting for nursing home placement. All the while, Mr. Speaker, beds at Dykeland Lodge sat empty. This was flagged for the Department of Health 2 years ago, but has not been fixed. So my question to the Minister is this: if his department is leaving beds empty at Dykeland Lodge, how many other nursing homes have unused capacity?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as it comes to placement in long-term care facilities, seniors have the option to pick their site where they want to be, have a second option as time moves on. Mr. Speaker, the member of the opposition, the Leader of the opposition, has spoke quite candidly against forcing people into certain homes, against the 100-kilometer policy. Is the member opposite suggesting that we force people to go to someplace maybe they don't want to go?
Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Minister would know that the complaints from the board are about community members, local community members who are trying to get in to that facility. The letter also states, and I will quote, "The government can explain to individuals laying on stretchers outside the emergency departments and their family members why hospital beds are filled with nursing home patients who should be in an empty bed in the nursing home just down the road." So I ask the Minister, what explanation can he give for leaving these beds empty?
Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This government will continue to invest in long-term care across this province. This government will continue to invest in continuing care across this province. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the dollars that are Canadian in this budget, it means that we are there for Nova Scotia. We are there for seniors, unlike the opposition who don't want to vote for it.
Honourable, the member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, on Friday, the Occupational Health and Safety Committee reported back on the review of complaints from correction officials at the Burnside facility. The committee found that there were health and safety concerns with the availability of weapons, with proper training, and with the lack of risk assessments. Nova Scotians deserve the comfort that they live in a province where the correctional service functions properly and they help to ensure our public safety. Now, my question to the Minister of Justice is, why did you let the state of our correctional services get this bad in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, what we're dedicated and committed to is improving the services and the level and quality of programming that we offer within our facilities. When concerns have been brought to my attention, government has acted on them, and then we continue to do that with the recommendation. We've put measures in place that are responsible and, again, the appropriate ones. And so I look forward to any further commentary the member might have.
Honourable, the member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the whole issue here is that this minister continues to react. Rather than to have a plan as to how to deal with matters, it's react to every crisis that comes up. The minister today announced that the Sheriff's Department will now be doing all of the transfers from justice facilities throughout Nova Scotia. The minister has refused to arm our correctional officers during transfers, even though they are trained and are allowed to be armed within the facilities. Today, by moving the full burden to the Sheriff's Department, the Justice Minister has implied that all individuals on escorts should be armed to protect themselves and to protect the public. So my question to the Minister is, why do you continue to refuse to allow the corrections officers to use the same tools on transfers as they are trained to use in correctional facilities?
Honourable, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the concerns have been raised, and as the honourable member would raise before the House, when you look at the fact that since April 8th, we've had 455 refusals to do transfers. We have a process in place to deal with that. We've formalized that process until the independent external audit is done. That is a constructive, responsible thing to do. Nova Scotians deserve that, and we're going to see to that process, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable, the member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing that this minister and this government need an audit to implement common sense here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians do not want to wait for an audit to tell them what they already know. If an individual is trained and allowed to use an enforcement tool inside a correctional facility, it makes sense that they should be allowed to use those same tools during an escort. Nova Scotians want a Minister of Justice who will implement common sense measures rather than hiding behind an audit that is months away. So my final question to the Minister is, why do you refuse to put the safety of the public and the safety of correction officers as a top priority for your government?
The Honourable, the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And to the honourable member, this government continues to take action, continues to implement positive strategies, no different than our policing for our safer streets and communities that are showing the statistics speak for themselves. We're also working, Mr. Speaker, when people indicate there's a concern. We've put in place measures. We have a compliance team with regards to issues for operating procedures at Burnside. We're adhering to that so that Nova Scotians have the confidence their correction system is working effectively. Right now, Mr. Speaker, over 90% of transfers are done by the Sheriff's Service, and in the interim of having that audit, they will provide that service with support from management and police if necessary.
The Honourable, the member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. There's been a lot of talk in the media and in the legislature around rural emergency closures, Mr. Speaker, but rural ERs aren't the only problem we are facing in emergency care. In Capital District, the latest operational report shows that in 1 month, 990 patients left the emergency room without being seen by a physician. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, why do 1 in 10 patients leave the Dartmouth General Emergency Department without being seen by a doctor when the provincial target is 1 in 50?
Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That is why this government is putting in place a self-care, telecare system, one that Nova Scotians can call into and find out about their health care strategies. Mr. Speaker, that is an investment that is in this year's budget that party is voting against.
The Honourable, the member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first supplementary.
Giving up on the emergency room is one thing when your condition is not urgent. people, quite honestly, get tired of waiting, Mr. Speaker. But the fact is, in the Capital District Health Authority, only non-urgent cases meet the provincial target of less than 2 hours before seeing a doctor. Capital District reports show that patients are waiting longer for level 3 urgent care than for level 5 non-urgent care. So I'd like to ask the minister, can the minister explain why urgent care is taking longer than non-urgent cares in our emergency room?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. It is our belief that it's better to keep people out of the ER in the first place, Mr. Speaker, which is why this budget has a $3.96 million investment in a self-care telecare system, one that people can call. And Mr. Speaker, those provinces who have brought this kind of thing in has dropped their visits to the ER by over almost 30%. Mr. Speaker, those are the 3s, those are the 4s, those are the 5s. Mr. Speaker, guess what? They're voting against it.
Honourable the member for Sackville-Cobequid on his final
Mr.
supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we voted for a budget last year that was supposed to see $8 million spent in medical equipment. I voted for a budget that was underspent last year of $13 million for infrastructure in healthcare, Mr. Speaker. The standards of care for acuity level 2, which means there's a potential threat of life, is a doctor should see that patient within 15 minutes. As important as that sounds, there isn't much progress on that file. At the QE2, for example, the average ER wait time for a level 2 jumped from just under 40 minutes in July of last year to more than 70 minutes by October 2007. So I'd like to ask the minister, can the minister explain why the busiest ER in Nova Scotia is not provided with the resource to do its job within government standards?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite fully knows, that the operation of an emergency room depends on the people, of course, within it. Mr. Speaker, we do give them the resources that are available to us to help them out. Mr. Speaker, the question I ask back to them, are they against the family pharmacare program? Are they against the seniors pharmacare program? Are they against the self-care telecare program? Yes, they are. We're here for Nova Scotians. We'll make the differences that are available. We're here for Nova Scotians.
The Honourable the member for Sackville-Cobequid on a new question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I supported a budget last year that underspent the pharmacare program by $7 million. That's what I supported, Mr. Speaker. There's been a great deal of media coverage around the scandal in Newfoundland with faulty breast cancer tests, Mr. Speaker. Nearly 400 women received inaccurate results between 1997 and 2005. Now, many Nova Scotia women are asking their doctor about the quality of testing here in Nova Scotia. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, what is his government doing, or what has his government done to ensure tests for breast cancer are thorough and complete here in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And a while ago, when this pathology issue came to light in Newfoundland, there was a quick review that was done of our system. Our system is done a fair amount differently. It is done more collaboratively. It is done with more checks and balances, Mr. Speaker. We have full confidence in our system when it comes to pathologies, when it comes to reviewing breast cancer tests.
The Honourable the member for Sackville-Cobequid on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, 190 Nova Scotia women will die of breast cancer this year, and 690 will be told they have the disease. Our high-caliber pathologists and lab technologists work hard so these women can get the proper treatment in a timely manner, but they are overworked and understaffed, Mr. Speaker. The chief executive of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons said this month that every institution in Canada is suffering from an increased workload and staff shortages. So I'd like to ask the minister, what is his government doing to address the increased demand on the shrinking number of these professionals in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, again, as I said, this government has invested heavily in digital mammography units, one that makes the test much easier to be reviewed. We've increased the programming, the advertising, making sure that women do get their tests when they need them. Mr. Speaker, our compliance with that is higher than any other province in the country. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to do those kinds of investments, and Mr. Speaker, we'll do that on behalf of all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable, the member for Sackville-Cobequid on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Newfoundland, Ontario, New Brunswick, and Manitoba have recently begun investigations into test results of some pathologists because of a quality assurance issue. Dr. Andrew Padmos of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons was quoted as saying, I quote, "There's no part of Canada, no institution in Canada which could claim to be invulnerable in concerns of this nature of the quality," end quote, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister, has the Minister started a review of the pathology service here in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, Andrew Padmos, Dr. Andrew Padmos, of course, being hadn't been our director of cancer care in Nova Scotia, and I thank him for the work that he has provided to the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, again, as I said in my first answer, when it comes to pathology, we do have a robust system. We have one that is built on checks and balances. We have one that is different than other provinces in this country, and we have full confidence in what it provides to Nova Scotians.
The Honourable, the member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health, Promotion and Protection. Mr. Speaker, last Friday, the eyes of the country were on a VIA train in Northern Ontario as word spread that a passenger had passed away, another had been airlifted as a result of respiratory distress, and five others on the train were experiencing flu-like symptoms. By all indications, the emergency response there was exceptional. Mr. Speaker, in reviewing the pandemic plan here, it has come to my attention that while the plan is available on the Department of Health's website, the Department of Health Protection and Promotion's most recent business plan indicates they are responsible for a coordinated health sector emergency response. So my question for the Minister is it you, Minister, who's responsible for executing a response to an emergency health crisis like the pandemic, or is it the Minister of Health?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health, Promotion and Protection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll respond to the member opposite that it is a responsibility of multiple departments to ensure that we are well protected with respect to a potential pandemic episode, Mr. Speaker. We work very collaboratively with the Department of Health, Department of Environment and Labour, and other departments of government to ensure that Nova Scotia is protected. We have a plan that's in place. It's an evolutionary document, and it's one that will serve our province well, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable, the member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, from a public perspective, it's not clear who is responsible and would lead one to wonder what the response would have been had the train stopped in Truro instead of Northern Ontario. And it also explains what happened in this province with the most recent outbreak of the mumps. Mr. Speaker, the business plan also goes on to state that sometime this year or next year, a pandemic protocol will be released, but the Department of Health's website already has a fairly comprehensive pandemic plan with a third part to be released this month. So my question is, could the Minister please tell us whether or not the pandemic plan already prepared is the protocol his department references in the business plan, or has he gone back to the drawing board?
Honourable, the Minister of Health, Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, I have every confidence in the staff at Health Promotion and Protection. We have excellent staff who have shown great leadership with respect to this area. As I have explained to the member opposite in the earlier question, the pandemic plan is an evolutionary document. It continues to evolve over time. It's in place now. I have confidence in the plan that we have. We work very collaboratively with the Department of Health and other departments of government to ensure all Nova Scotians are protected, Mr. Speaker, and I sleep well at night, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I don't recall asking the Minister how he slept at night. I recall asking him to answer the questions, which he hasn't done. But, Mr. Speaker, the Minister's business plan also indicates that his department is beginning work on a health warehousing project designed to enhance the Minister's department and the Department of Health's capacity to respond to an emergency. Phase 1, Mr. Speaker, is supposed to begin this year and entail the scoping of the project. So my final question for the Minister is, given that capacity in the health system is critical to an emergency response, why will it take this Minister a whole year to scope out a project?
Honourable, the Minister of Health, Promotion and Protection.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I answered the member's question in the first two questions. Clearly, I obviously wasn't listening. I will say this again, Mr. Speaker. Our staff at Health Promotion and Protection are among the best in the country. They provide great advice to me as their minister. We accept that advice. We work very closely with the Department of Health. We have a plan in place. It's one that will protect Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. I have great confidence in that plan. It's unfortunate the member opposite doesn't have the same kind of confidence that I have in the staff at Health Promotion and Protection, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable the member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you.
Feed Nova Scotia is the central distribution point for food banks in Nova Scotia. This organization and its member agencies serve thousands of Nova Scotia families each year. By the end of June, they will have spent $100,000 on fuel to deliver food across this province. This is a 22% increase over the previous year's fuel expense. My question to the Minister, how will her department be helping agencies like Feed Nova Scotia to continue their work in the face of rising prices of food and fuel?
Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank my honourable colleague for the opportunity to rise and speak about the relationships, Mr. Speaker, that we have with the Department of Community Services with our community organizations. You know, the tremendous work that's being done from one end of this province to the other. Often the unsung heroes, Mr. Speaker, and so we very much value the fine work of the groups like Feed Nova Scotia, the Boys and Girls Clubs across this province, women's centres, etc., Mr. Speaker. And for that very reason, Mr. Speaker, we're pleased to have an increase in our budget, Mr. Speaker, of $300,000 for those direct grant agencies that this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, will be voting for on Thursday in our budget, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable the member for Dartmouth North on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Feed Nova Scotia anticipates another 21% hike this year. They are budgeting $125,000 for fuel. That's if prices stay at today's level. Increasing costs for food, shelter, heat and transportation mean that more families will need help from their local food bank. The food bank is often the only thing stopping Nova Scotians from going hungry. I asked the Minister, given Feed Nova Scotia's critical role in keeping families fed in our province, will she work with this organization to ensure it's able to keep doing its critical work?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Speaker, we're very pleased with the partnerships that we have with various community organizations, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to work with all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that those most in need and those vulnerable in our communities, Mr. Speaker, are well cared for.
The Honourable the member for Dartmouth North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Feed Nova Scotia is expecting an increased demand this year from families who have never had to access the food bank before. Government funding only accounts for 4% of Feed Nova Scotia's budget. So I asked the Minister, when will her government recognize its role in helping hungry Nova Scotians and ensure Feed Nova Scotia has adequate funding to help our vulnerable families?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I want to first of all applaud the fine work that's done by organizations from one end of this province to the other, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the information of those members in the House, this side of the House, this government does recognize the invaluable work that's being done. Again, Mr. Speaker, that's why the $300,000 increase in our budget for the direct grant agencies. That's why we have $14.9 million more in our Affordable Housing Trust. That's why we'll be providing $300,000 for wheelchairs, Mr. Speaker, from one end of this province to the other, which obviously that side of the House does not support, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Tourism. Mr. Speaker, everywhere we look, whether we turn on our TV or cross the bridge or walk through the ferry terminal, we see ads promoting New Brunswick. New Brunswick recognizes that they need to market their tourism industry more locally. However, Mr. Speaker, yesterday when the minister was interviewed and asked why we aren't promoting Nova Scotia more to Nova Scotians, he stated, "I don't understand." My question to the minister, with the rising price of gas and the high Canadian dollar that will reduce U.S. visitors, why doesn't the minister see the value of marketing Nova Scotia more to Nova Scotians?
The Honourable the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what I truly do not understand is the question from that member. I'll tell you that.
Take it easy.
The department, The department, Mr. Speaker, spends $20 million in marketing and advertising each and every year to promote Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, if the minister and this government cannot effectively advertise Nova Scotia to ourselves, how are we going to attract people from other jurisdictions? The province will fail in its attempt to double tourism by 2012 unless we spend more on advertising in all markets, including ourselves. Right now, a person living in Halifax has a choice: a 4-hour drive to Cape Breton or a 2-hour drive to New Brunswick. And New Brunswick is winning the advertising war. My question to the minister: how can this minister sit by and allow New Brunswick attract Nova Scotians in what will no doubt be a tight tourism year?
Honourable the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once again, we spend $20 million on marketing and advertising, $6 million directly on advertising. Mr. Speaker, on the Atlantic province alone, we spend over $1 million encouraging and enticing people to come visit. I suggest that the member across the way should not get very excited about a program down in the ferry office, Mr. Speaker, because at this particular time, we are promoting our province in New Brunswick by means of the newspaper, television, our radio. Mr. Speaker, over 50% of tourists come from the Atlantic region, and I suggest that we're doing a good job in promoting us. Mr. Speaker, the point is clear. We have a great product to share with the people of the Atlantic provinces here in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in the same media interview with CBC Radio yesterday, the minister was asked about the New Brunswick tourism ads at our harbour ferry terminals. And he stated, and I quote, "I certainly hope that if someone arrives here from Ontario or from Europe or from the US, I hope they spend their week or 10 days here, enjoy what we have to offer, and if they have a few days left, I hope and encourage them to go to New Brunswick." So my question to the minister: why is the minister publicly encouraging tourists to leave Nova Scotia and spend their vacations in New Brunswick?
The Honourable the Minister of Tourism, Heritage and Culture.
Well, obviously the member spends a lot of time tracking what I said and what I have not said, Mr. Speaker. But I suggest if we encourage people from Europe, the United States, or across Canada to come and spend 10 days in Nova Scotia, we'd be very pleased with that, Mr. Speaker. And I encourage visitors from other parts of the world to come to Nova Scotia and share the gift of our hospitality and our positive attitude that we have. And Mr. Speaker, we have so many things to offer, and I suggest that the member across the way should go up to the Metro Centre and enjoy a hockey game, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. And
the Honourable the Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. You done? The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. Heather Stewart is disabled and has to rely on the support of community services. She lives on $560 a month and has done so for nearly 6 years. When her fridge needed to be replaced, she was relieved that there was a special needs fund that would be available to her. Relief turned to stress, however, when she found out that the maximum help she could receive was $200, and she was expected to buy the cheapest fridge she could find. So my question, Mr. Speaker, for the minister is, what kind of fridge does she anticipate someone could find for under $200?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague brought forward the issue of special needs funding, Mr. Speaker, commitment of over $38 million, Mr. Speaker, annually to those special needs to ensure that situations that arise, Mr. Speaker, are taken care of. That's why, Mr. Speaker, this government again has committed to an increase in the personal allowance, Mr. Speaker. That will be part of this year's plan, Mr. Speaker. That's why we continue to increase dollars going to the special needs, increasing that budget as well, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue on this side of the House to ensure that we take care of those vulnerable Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth North on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, with a $200 maximum for a fridge and a $150 cap for stoves, clients have to purchase older appliances, if they are lucky enough to find anything in that price range at all. I'll table an information sheet from Nova Scotia Power, and it states, I quote, "A 10-year-old refrigerator or freezer can cost considerably more to operate than the new energy-efficient models of the same size." And I don't want to forget, Mr. Speaker, that the HST will apply to those new appliances or used. I asked the Minister, why not help ESIA clients buy the most energy-efficient appliances that they can find?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise and Mr. Speaker, reconfirm the commitment of this side of the House, of this government, to Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. Again, an increase in the personal allowance, Mr. Speaker, which will bring us to a 15.6% increase 5 consecutive years, Mr. Speaker, something that we believe firmly in on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. Again, those additional dollars for childcare, for subsidized childcare, the decrease in the daily parent fee, again, all parts of the budget, Mr. Speaker, that we know will help Nova Scotian families, help Nova Scotians who need us most, Mr. Speaker, what we believe in on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth North on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'll tell you, Heather Stewart's feeling really left behind. Mr. Speaker, when someone's living on only $560 a month, every dollar counts. Heather says, and I quote, "I am tired living the way I have to live. It's debilitating mentally." I asked the Minister, given rising energy costs, when will her government change the special needs policy so that clients aren't forced to buy appliances that won't make them able to afford the increase in electricity?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, while this side of the House is pleased to present a rebate program for low-income Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, while this side of the House is prepared to put a budget in place that will ensure, Mr. Speaker, that Nova Scotians are cared for, that side of the House is saying no, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today a letter from the Premier appeared in the Cape Breton Post and in the New Glasgow News. I will table copies. In the letter, the Premier is defending his out-of-touch comments were in reference to a reporter's question on what people should do to deal with rising gas prices. He stated, and let me get this right, is not to offend him. I think the most important thing we do as a government can do, and all Nova Scotians can do, is to purchase more fuel-efficient vehicles to take up the opportunity for transit. Well, Mr. Speaker, that quote sounds exactly like the headline reported. Buy a new car or take the bus. Since many Nova Scotian families can't afford the newer, fuel-efficient vehicles, my question to you, Mr. Speaker, is he said use transit. But what is the difference between taking the bus and using transit?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about what that side of the House, the NDP, are voting against, Mr. Speaker. What they're voting against is individuals in our province who use transit to get a new provincial tax credit, Mr. Speaker, to make it more affordable. What the NDP are voting against, Mr. Speaker, is a $3 million fund for every single municipal unit in this province to support new transit initiatives, Mr. Speaker. That is what the NDP are going to vote against this week, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton Nova on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the advice to take up the opportunity for transit as a solution is just as out of touch with the realities of Nova Scotians as is take the bus. Mr. Speaker, what the letter from the Premier says is that he's getting lots of calls from angry Nova Scotians, and rightfully so. For example, the people of Babu can't take the bus. The people of Pictou County can't take the bus, and the people of Eastern Shore can't take the bus. The list goes on, Mr. Speaker. So my question to you, Mr. Speaker, is why would he advise Nova Scotians to take up the opportunity for transit when most of the rural communities is not even an option?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, that member and the NDP are going to vote against, Mr. Speaker, a $3 million incentive, Mr. Speaker, for rural municipalities to provide new opportunities for transit. In fact, Mr. Speaker, and I'll go back to back to my office. I believe the leader of the NDP wrote me a letter in support of the Straight Area Transit Initiative, Mr. Speaker. Such an initiative as this new fund will support, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the member for Cape Breton Nova on his final supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order. The Honourable the member for Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't have a problem voting against the budget because the people of Cape Breton Nova have not allowed that party to get their deposit back since 1983. 1983. Mr. Speaker, the letter, Mr. Speaker, the letter ends with the Premier saying, "What can I accept is criticism for something I did not do." So again, I guess, Mr. Speaker, in advising Nova, so Mr. Speaker, my question through you is, I will ask the Premier in advising how Nova Scotians can deal with high gas prices. How is he advising Nova Scotians to take up the opportunity for transit and any different than telling them to take the bus?
The Honourable the Premier.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, the NDP put politics ahead of people, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, what they're interested in is big unions, while we're interested in, Mr. Speaker, is big initiatives which are going to make a difference for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. What they want to do, Mr. Speaker, is shortchange Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to shortchange Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. We're going to invest in Nova Scotia while they're going to vote against a balanced budget, while they're going to vote against tax relief, while they're going to vote against supporting rural transit, Mr. Speaker. We're going to stand up for Nova Scotians.
Honourable the member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for emergency management. Mr. Speaker, in December 2006, the Emergency Management Office issued a caution to Nova Scotians about the use of emergency internet phone services. And just last week, government issued another caution over internet phone services in the wake of a young boy's death in Calgary, when a 911 call sent by the internet was directed to an ambulance service in the wrong province. My question to the Minister, if there were concerns about internet phone services in 2006, why did it take a year and a half to issue another caution about this service?
The Honourable the Minister responsible for emergency management.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for raising this question. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious management. That's why it was done before. That's why it was done again. It's not government's role to tell people what to purchase, but we certainly want them to purchase with the right information. And in this case, we want them to know that there may be a breakdown in 911 service if they do not buy from a local emergency phone service source.
The Honourable the member for Digby Annapolis on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we know that internet-based phone services are growing rapidly, and therefore the possibility of an unfortunate event like this happening in Nova Scotia is a real possibility. We must make certain that 911 calls from the internet-based phone services are directed to the proper offices here in Nova Scotia, so an unfortunate event like what happened in Calgary does not happen here. My question to the Minister, what, after a year and a half, have you done to solve this problem?
The Honourable the Minister responsible for emergency management.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in my first answer, with the Oda province voice over internet phone service centres, the information about the location of the telephone call and the telephone number is not necessarily given. It has to be confirmed over the phone. That is why we issued the press release. That was why I was pleased to accept the scrum at Province House, just to caution Nova Scotians to consider this before they consider their choice of service provider.
The Honourable, the member for Digby-Annapolis on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the use of emergency calls over the internet obviously still have some problems. We must address these problems so that help will arrive when Nova Scotians need it most. More and more people may choose to use this service in the future, and government must ensure that our 911 services are working properly. So my question is, are you aware of any technology that will ensure that what happened in Calgary doesn't happen in Nova Scotia?
Honourable, the Minister responsible for emergency management.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we are very proud of our 911 service here in Nova Scotia. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I would argue that we are a leader in the country. We are constantly investing in new technologies, trying to make sure it's state-of-the-art. We will continue to do so, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Natural Resources. GPI Atlantic last week reported that the industrial approach to forestry in Nova Scotia is not working. We now have fewer jobs in the industry, our natural capital is being depleted, and there's degradation of forest health, loss of species diversity and wildlife habitat. And what we're left with is a lot of younger, even-aged forests, and it's becoming obvious even that the present model is not working. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, has the Minister had a chance to analyze the GPI Atlantic report, and if so, what corrective action will the department be taking?
The Honourable, the Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for his question. GPI Atlantic tries to take a different view to measure economic success, and we certainly appreciate their approach. Mr. Speaker, we were interested in their comments. We feel that they're quite timely in view of the fact we are just launching our public consultation process as part of the Natural Resources Strategy Review. It's being led in the first phase by voluntary planning. We understand GPI Atlantic have included them on the distribution list, and we feel that that will provide for better discussion as they tour the province listening to Nova Scotians.
The Honourable, the member for Pictou West on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, one of the largest issues that GPI Atlantic pointed out was the significant loss of old forests and the continuing shift to ever younger forests. With clear cutting and over-harvesting, the reduction of age diversity is continuing unabated. Harvest levels have increased by nearly 60% since the 1980s, and forest stands are being harvested while they're still immature. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, when is the Minister going to start looking at sustainable forests and sustainable ecosystems and not just more and more harvesting?
The Honourable, the Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I refer to the member's question from the other day where he pointed out the government investing in something called Category 7 silviculture program, which basically is for uneven age management and a more varied Acadian forest. In fact, that's exactly what the member is speaking of. That was acknowledged in the GPI Atlantic report. We're moving in that direction, but Mr. Speaker, what we really want this year is to hear from Nova Scotians so that we can try to incorporate their wishes into our new natural resources strategy.
The Honourable, the member for Pictou West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, GPI Atlantic points out that Nova Scotia is now the second lowest among provinces for value-added forest production, and point out that present forest methods can no longer sustain natural forest ecosystems and actually threaten forest-dependent communities in Nova Scotia. So my question finally is, when is this minister going to start standing up for a sustainable forest environment and a healthy forest economy?
The Honourable, the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I actually got a copy of the GPI Atlantic press release, which I'd be happy to table, and it starts off by saying Nova Scotia has less clear cutting than it had a decade ago, more sustainable selection harvesting, and more land under protection. That is, and this is the quote, genuine progress, says GPI Atlantic, the Halifax-based nonprofit research group that measures the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of progress. And Mr. Speaker, I'd be pleased to table that.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Environment and Labour, responsible for liquor licensing regulations. Last August, the Minister announced new regulations which loosened restrictions in several areas. This included letting clubs and beverage rooms stay open 1 hour later. Mr. Speaker, alcohol abuse is a serious social problem with public health and public safety ramifications, as we found out in the events over the Christmas holidays in downtown Halifax. My question to the Minister is, before bringing in longer hours, did he take into consideration the concerns of those responsible for public safety and health, like the police and public health officials?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank her for her question. The Alcohol and Gaming Department consulted far and wide with many different groups, and over a period of about 2 years before it modernized the regulations with the consensus of all the stakeholder groups. However, I would say to the honourable member, she's very concerned about strengthening our alcohol and gaming division, that she might want to consider voting for the budget, which has $150,000 more for alcohol and gaming in it this year.
The Honourable the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, there was a period of consultation before the regulations were loosened. However, individual Nova Scotians and agencies made suggestions about the liquor laws, and among these agencies were the Halifax Regional Police. In a letter to the department, which I will table, Police Chief Frank Beasley writes, and I quote, "Some evidence suggests that extended operating hours coincide with higher levels of alcohol consumption and corresponding increases in violent crime, road crashes, and illicit drug activity." The Halifax Police Chief goes on to suggest reducing operations by 1 hour to cut down on the crime and disorder that occurs at closing time. My question to the Minister is, why didn't he listen to the Police Chief Frank Beasley's advice on how to keep our streets and communities safer?
Honourable the Minister of Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do feel a bit sorry for the New Democratic Party this session. Their research has been abysmal, and they've had to apologize on several occasions. Here's another case where they're out of date, because the Chronicle Herald just today reported that violent crime is down by 11%, robberies by 40%, assaults by 6%, property crime by 9%, auto theft by 20%, theft under $5,000 by 12%, and enforcement-driven numbers related to drug offences slightly up. So in every other category, Mr. Speaker, progress has been made, so maybe she might want to catch up with the time.
The Honourable the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Halifax Police Chief was not the only official to comment. The Acting Director of Addiction Services in the Department of Health Promotion and Protection also recommended against longer bar hours. Here's part of what he wrote, and I will table it. The scientific literature clearly suggests that increases in the availability of alcohol is associated with increases in per capita consumption in a population, resulting in increases in alcohol-related harms. The medical officer of Health for Capital Health agreed, writing that increased consumption resulting from increased access especially affects youth and young adults, the two groups who are already at highest risk to be heavy and/or high-risk drinkers. Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary is for the Premier. Why did his government put the longer bar hours ahead of the health and safety of Nova Scotians?
Order, please. The time allotted for oral question periods has expired. The Honourable the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the House for giving me this time to introduce the other half of the Horton High School class who are here with their leader, Deborah Forsyth, and we're delighted to have them here. I hope they enjoyed a lively question period, and I'd ask them to rise, and I'd ask the House to give them a warm welcome.
Before we continue, yesterday the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park rose on a point of privilege. After reviewing the information that was supplied to me and checking with Hansard, I believe what we have is a disagreement between two members. The Honourable, the Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that you do now rise and we move into Committee of the Whole House on Supply. And to her.
The Honourable, the member for Shelburne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to thank the member from Cape Breton Centre for sacrificing his time today and giving me the privilege of talking about Shelburne County. Mr. Speaker, I could take a lot of time and talk about the many festivals that's going to be in our community over the next few months, such as the Shelburne County Lobster Festival or the Loyalist Landing. But I felt compelled to talk about the critic area and the most important industry to Shelburne County, which is the fishing. I'd like to just take the members back to when I was a small child of the age of 10 years old. I started out around the local wharfs, and my first job as a young 10-year-old was catching scalpings for bait. And I may touch on that later. I also started Irish mossing as a very young child. In fact, I participated with my brothers and sisters, and there were 7 in the family, so I have some fond memories of that, Mr. Speaker. And as a very young man, and this is typical, I'm not just talking about myself, this is typical of our culture in Shelburne County and many coastal communities across our province. I participated as a young man in hand lining, long lining, herring, and I can remember around the Seal Island areas in Green Island, the visual impact of seeing 300 or 400 vessels at night is a remarkable scene. I also raked Irish moss, and this is just typical of the many young men and women in our community. I also remember the senior fishermen teaching us how to navigate, and actually, I don't know if too many people in this building knows how to box a compass, but please don't ask me how to do it, but every degrees has a name. And we learned to navigate by a compass, a watch, and a sounder. And as a young child, I was taught by the seniors in our community the many knots, and believe me, there are a number of them. There's reef knots, square knots, and Mr. Speaker, I can tie a rolling bowline or an anchor knot with my eyes shut. I was taught very well. And this is a good lead-in because I'd like to announce that my wife and I, Luella Cameron, will be married this August for 35 years, and that is a marriage knot. That's a little Shelburne humor there. That is particular marriage knot. But the point I'm trying to make, back in the early 60s and 70s, there was one particular issue that kind of dominated the whole industry. It was called free enterprise. And our communities were very successful. We were all independent, and the decisions to do all the earlier topics that I talked about was based at the local level. If you wanted to go from one sector to another, it was the individual's decision, and it worked. And then if you want to, in the late 60s, I remember a phrase that was created by Ottawa. I've never forgot it. What was it? And the phrase